can start now.
Good afternoon, everybody. First, I would like to thank Ambassador Ashok Kant and the Institute of Chinese Studies for organizing this discussion on South Korea's foreign policy dilemma in the Indo-Pacific era. South Korea, Republic of Korea, is of course a very important country, fourth largest economy in Asia, 10th or 11th largest in the world. And the location of Korean Peninsula and the issues which have been there in Korean Peninsula since the Second World War make that region very, very important for the future of Indo-Pacific. And the importance is also evident. Today, many of us have seen the article written by Ambassador Sujan Chanoy, director of IDSA, on the same topic, how is Seoul looking at Indo-Pacific. So let us all imagine that we are in Seoul, we are in Blue House, and we are flies on the wall. President Moon Jae-in is discussing the Indo-Pacific issue with his advisors, and he is gazing at the Indo-Pacific region. What would he look at? Of course, he will note the maritime space, Pacific, Indian Ocean. In landmass, perhaps his focus will be more on East Asia, then a little less on South Asia, and still less on Eastern Africa. But he'll be very concerned about the sea routes, about the oil flow unimpeded, and trade routes. He may also remind his advisor that what are really South Korea's overarching interests. Number one, peace and stability in the region, of course. Two, for South Korea, an export-based economy, unimpeded trade relations, as well as flow of trade. No sanctions, etc., because the sanctions against China will indirectly hit South Korea also. Also, he would like complete freedom of navigation, whether it is Indian Ocean, whether it is South China Sea, East China Sea, but freedom of navigation only for freight vessels or also for navies? That is a question to be answered. He would also note that the peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific region is under strain, and situation is changing and deteriorating in the last few years, and the trend is for further deterioration. Spat between India and China, South China Sea continued expansionism of China, and other countries have started reacting to it. He would also see that while other countries may have problems with China, South Korea really does not have a major conflict issue or problem with China. There are differences on THAAD, etc., but not really very, very um, complex, which cannot be resolved. He would also look at a world order which was erstwhile led, or particularly in the Indo-Pacific region, led by United States, and had been fairly stable after the Vietnam War, has been weakening, and America's continued resolve to spend blood and treasure for peace and stability in that region needs to be examined. He would also recall that United States, particularly President Trump, has been pressurizing him all the time to increase and the share burden of the 28,000 US forces in Korea. And that has been the most important issue on President Trump's mind. And President Moon and his advisors are not at all happy about that. So the dilemma number one for President Moon and his advisors would be how to position Republic of Korea in this developing US-China contestation. In that context, he would look at what is the national mood towards China among the people of South Korea, because it is a democracy. What will be the future of THAAD? He has already sort of promised 3 no's to China. And as sitting in India, what we'll need to look at perhaps is that whatever policy is being followed, will it be a more stable, permanent policy, or it might change with a change of regime from democratic to conservative government. The second set of issues Korean leadership would look at is on the economic direction which Republic of Korean companies should take. There has been a contraction because of COVID and export issues already in the Korean economy. Korea, chaebols, Korea itself, they are very well integrated with value chains in Indo-Pacific, from United States to East Asia to India, China, and of course they have an export-based economy. They are the only country or one, and in Japan they have a trade surplus with China. So dilemma number two would be the long term, should the Korean chaebols continue to bet on China, or whether they should start looking for alternative geographies, whether it is India or Vietnam, etc., for long-term commitments. The third basket of issues would be about their geostrategic concerns. Perhaps President Moon would not favor a unipolar East Asia. Here I am not saying Indo-Pacific, I am saying East Asia, because Korean Peninsula had suffered immensely when East Asia came under the unipolar domination of Japan, and they were after all a colony from 1910 to 1945. So one would like to believe that in principle, President Moon and his advisors would look for a multipolar Asia, East Asia, because Indo-Pacific, one would say, is already bipolar. Japan and United States and China, and but we are talking about more in East Asian context, and push for a multipolar East Asia without annoying China. That would be a conundrum from them. In that context, where do you place relations with Japan, which seem to be deteriorating? And in any multipolar East Asia, of course, Japan would be a pole. Whether a dilemma is whether Korea should welcome it or not, and how to react to it. And of course, for India, both are important. Both are our strategic partners, both Japan and the Republic of Korea. And one would really wish that they have a greater, better friendship, relationship, harmony between the two. In that whole context, one would also need to look at President Moon Jae-in's own foreign policy priority in the last 3 years, which has really been on peace and détente in the Korean Peninsula, and New Southern policy, that means more focus on ASEAN and India. And it had been working quite well in 2018 till part of 2019, but seems to have come to some kind of a standstill. US foreign policy under President Trump, was quite focused in this region on denuclearization of North Korea in 2018 up to middle of 19, now seems to be shifting towards South China Sea. Now, does it give more space to President Moon to pursue his efforts for improving relations with North Korea? because it appears that President Moon would like to delink the two processes, the negotiations between United States and North Korea about denuclearization and negotiations between South Korea and North Korea for normalization. And in this whole context, the related issues would be whether what is the extended nuclear deterrence and ultimately nuclear deterrence if South Korea has, then it would be against whom? Against North Korea, against China? These questions are very much up in the air now. And of course, the continued presence of 28,000 US troops for which Korea is being asked to pay more. To talk about all this and much more, we have Professor Sandeep Mishra, friend of mine for many years. We had taught together in Delhi University, now associate professor in Jawaharlal Nehru University, an expert in Korean Peninsula on both Koreas, on East Asia, and generally an expert on the strategic direction which the world is taking and how India deals with it. But before I hand over to Professor Mishra, a couple of house rules. There is a chat box at the bottom of your screen. If you have any query or a question, kindly put it there and we'll see to raise them during Q&A. And once Q&A starts, there would be a icon of raise hand. And if you click on it, then I'll try to recognize you and request you to ask a question. With the, Sandeep, please speak for about 30 minutes and then we'll shift to Q&A. Over to you, Sandeep.
Thank you, sir. It's my pleasure and privilege to be the speaker at the ICS Wednesday seminar. I propose this topic, South Korean foreign policy dilemma and in the Indo-Pacific era. But actually today itself, as Tyal said told, actually we had a good article published by DG of IDSA on the same topic. Actually his title is Seoul and Indo-Pacific. It's quite similar to my intent to my topic to which I'm going to speak on. And I think Tyal sir has also mentioned, and basically he charted out the broad picture in which we can look at South Korea dilemma in the Indo-Pacific era. Actually, I propose this topic with the sense that, in last few months, especially after Galwan Valley, I can say that in India, people have been talking about decoupling with China. India getting decoupled with China. And I agree with that proposition in the sense that we need to have a reasonable and long-term policy to reduce our dependence on China. But sometimes people are too excited, and they even talk about why not have a, bilateral security alliance with US and so many things. So I thought that maybe if we describe about a very old ally of United States, that's South Korea, maybe that will be helpful to understand how and what course India should take on. So that was my intention. Now, coming to South Korea's basically this Indo-Pacific dilemma, I'll tell you one interesting thing which is happening in the COVID-19 pandemic period. Unlike so many other countries, suppose Australia has demanded that there must be some kind of international probe for the role of China in spreading COVID-19 SARS virus. But if you look at the way Japan and South Korea, especially South Korea had been behaving in the last few months, it's really quite strange. South Korea had been actually quite, cooperating with China. Not only that, I think South Korea was probably the first country which in late April itself, actually 1st of May, they had an agreement. And through that agreement, China and South Korea, they are having very quick exchange of businessmen, scientists, and government officials who are dealing with both economy and you can say this pandemic management. So I will say that's a very strange thing which is happening in South Korea and China relations. I will say that if you look at last few years, Moon Jae-in, after he became president, December 2017, he visited China. So many other important officials visited from each other. And December 29, 2019, I think Wang Yi visited South Korea. During pandemic time, I can say that in the initial period, South Korea provided lots of masks and other assistance to China. And later on, China reciprocated. Actually, China provided almost 1 million, more than actually 1 million masks in early March period. And it's need to remember that that time in China needed around 600 million masks, whereas they were just producing 160 million masks. So I'm saying that a very strong, not only that, President Xi Jinping and Moon Jae-in, they had some conversation, telephonic conversations, and they admitted that both of them, they have been responding to economic situation emanating from this pandemic quite, you can say, well. So I will say that actually, and this week, actually tomorrow or day after tomorrow, China's top diplomat Yang Jiechi is going to visit Seoul. They are going to talk about so many issues. I will talk about that. But I think I'm saying that in last few years, especially during pandemic, there's a lots of connect between China and South Korea. If I contrast this with actually US and South Korea relations, I will just flag few things. When first summit meet happened between North Korea and America, after the meeting, in the news conference, you can say like conference, Trump announced that joint political exercises between South Korea and US, they are going to be suspended. It was a unilateral decision. South Korea was not consulted as far as we know, whatever public domain we know about Sochna. Like there's no information that it was discussed. So this was really shocking for South Korean. Then, as you know, that Trump from the very beginning had been against US-South Korea FTA. Actually, 2016 September, he even threatened that he is going to walk out. 2012, South Korea and US, they had FTA. 16, Trump wanted to walk out. South Korea had to compromise, and 2018 September, they revised FTA. That will probably slightly. Then I think, as Tayasa was saying, that cost sharing is a big problem. 2018 till 2018, South Korea contributed 830 million US dollars for American troops stationed in South Korea. In 2019, after lots of pressure from America, they increased it to 924 million US dollars. But America had been demanding that should be increased to 5 billion US dollar. Actually, recently they have reduced it. There are two stories. One is that America is demanding 5 billion, another is saying 1.3 billion. But anyway, that's a very huge problem. Usually this special measures agreement which South Korea and US they have is meant for 5 years, but 2018 they had just for 1 year. And this year also they were supposed to have it by April 1st, but they were not able to have it. And then I think more than 4,000 South Korean employees who work in American base, they are facing lots of problems. They are not actually receiving their salary in last 3-4 months. Fourth important point between US and South Korea I will try to flag is that in July 2020, 1 month before actually, US Defense Secretary announced that they are going to have some kind of say rotational deployment of American forces. So rather than keeping them at certain places, American forces, we want that those forces should be deployed at different places as per demands. That may be good for so many other countries, but country like South Korea, they feel that it's basically dilution of commitment. Now, another factor, if I say that actually recently, American ambassador to South Korea, he mentioned Ambassador Harry Harris It's a very interesting. Harry Harris is basically a Japanese American, and he used to have mustache. So in case that is required, I will discuss. But I think that was not actually very good for overall popular opinion in South Korea. But Harry Harris actually recently, he made a statement saying that South Korea must coordinate more on its North Korea policy with the United States. So I'm saying that these are, on the one hand, if you look at US, like South Korea-China relation, you can see that there are lots of connection they are making after THAAD problem, theater air defense, theater terminal high altitude area defense system. But now they are actually having lots of, you can say, connect with each other. Whereas US and South Korea, there are lots of problems coming in. I think if we have a brief, you can say, historical perspective, I will say that, look, South Korea in early 1990, they were looking for some kind of economic new market. So 1992, they normalized relations with China. China was a good economic partner, so they had lots of gains. Then in the late 90s, you can see that especially President Kim Dae-jung of South Korea, he was looking for autonomy of South Korean foreign policy, especially in dealing with North Korea. And that led to, you can say, further coming close to China. Actually, in those days, some articles, some, you can say, book, actually a book was written by a SNU professor between Korea, between old ally and new partners. So kind of dilemma actually that time also they were talking about. So they went to China for economic gains. They were looking for autonomy, South Korean foreign policy makers. And soon, actually 2004, China became trading partner number 1 of South Korea. Many people say that when all these changes were happening, the US approach towards South Korea has remained quite static. They are still, actually many South Koreans still, they complain that Americans, they still believe that client and patron relationship which they had in 1950s, 60s, and maybe 70s. South Korea is quite changed, and I think probably Americans. So if you look at in this context, South Korea, when they make their foreign policy, they have still actually, foreign policy wise, they have still, I can say, very limited and very focused approach. Their usually first priority is North Korea. The most important priority that how they are going to deal with North Korea. Actually, North Korea Defense White Paper 2018, when it was released, I went and I thought that I should find out what kind of, you can say, because earlier they uploaded only a Korean version. And I thought that maybe Korean version will take longer time to read. So I thought that maybe I could look at what debates are there. And I could find that just one debate was dominating. In whole defense white paper, the one issue was important for Korean media and Korean people, and that is that North Korea has been removed from this. They have not been given this time enemy status. So you can see that North Korea is very important, priority number 1. The second priority is, of course, their alliance with United States. And the third priority is China. Then fourth, actually, Russia and Japan and Russia. So I'm saying that first North Korea, second, you can say US, third, basically all regional, you can say 3 other players. And next priority is basically their diplomatic relations with other countries who are important for trade relationships. So these are the broad priority areas of their foreign policy. If you look at if you read their annual, can say diplomatic documents, diplomatic reports, and I think that's the, you can say, in last few years, I think two, three things are more important actually, which has come up. One is basically that now they are looking at Korean soft power, how Korea should be middle power, soft power, and that's why they're looking for, you can say, exporting their cultural products. Cultural products, by the way, every year they gain, according to one estimate, around 10 billion US dollar out of their cultural products, Hallyu, what they call. And they are also providing ODA to different countries. And I think through that, they are trying to build their soft power. they are basically also in last few years, they have been much more concerned about Asia policy. Actually, the first new Asia policy came during Imeng Park period. But if you look at successive governments, this focus and basically on Asia had been consistent, or maybe it has gone, you can say it has become much more important. So I will say that these are the big, you can say, priority area that we need to keep in mind. Now, I can talk about different dilemmas of South Korean foreign policy, especially on North Korea, suppose. So North Korea, a very, whether they should engage North Korea, whether they should contain North Korea. If they engage North Korea, China generally is happy. But if they contain North Korea, usually American policymakers are happy. Actually, there's a big problem between US and South Korea while dealing with North Korea. You know, apart from 1998 to 2000, 3 years, generally, whenever there is a conservative government in America, South Korea, they are having a progressive government. And when they are having progressive government, Americans are having conservative government. So this mismatch has been really, and that basically also, whether they should have a engagement policy with North Korea, whether they should have, and how effective that engagement or containment policy is. So I will say that this is basically the broad contours. Even now, actually, suppose 2017, when Moon Jae-in came to power, you know that lots of rhetoric, lots of thrilled voices were there from both North Korean side and American side, rocket men and all those slogans, and I don't have to repeat that. So I will say that a very tense situation was there on Korean Peninsula. Lots of people, they were anticipating that anything could happen. But in those circumstances, Moon Jae-in came to power. He took this matter. He basically started his engagement policy. He tried to take in confidence American also policymakers. And through that, actually, he had been able to have 3 summit meetings with Kim Jong-un, North Korean leader, and also there have been 2 or 3, I think 3 meetings between Trump and even though it's not moving forward, but I think somehow he has been able to connect to. So this is basically their important foreign policy dilemma, how to deal with North Korea. But I will keep myself focused on US-China, this how this contest has been happening. And in that context, I will say that, look, from South Korean perspective, as Prayas was saying, that look, they are very important security ally of United States. But at the same time, China is their trading partner number 1. So for so many years, they have been trying to separate these 2 relationships. In security, strategic, political issues, they go along with United States. In economics and trade, they are happy to deal with China also. I can give you one example. In 2014-15, when America proposed AIIB, THAAD system to be installed in South Korea. And when China AIIB, South Korea should also become a founder member of AIIB. There was a big debate in South Korean politics. And finally, people said, look, join AIIB because that's and you join, you can say, THAAD also, because it's politics and security. So basically, they have tried to keep these 2 domains of exchanges separate from each other. Now, but THAAD system, as you know, that 2016, when THAAD system was installed on Korea, lots of backlash happened. And I think in 2017 itself, according to estimates, around 10 billion US dollar trade loss, and you can say other losses happened too. Lotte department store had to suffer. South, like tourism and other exchanges with cultural products reaching out to China, all those they suffered. And I will say that, you know, it was, we can say, very problematic period. But Moon Jae-in, after coming to power, how he has been trying to placate both the countries. If you look at the broad, you can say, suppose with China, what he did. When he came to power, December 2018, he visited and he tried to pacify China. Not only that, he said that, look, on North Korean issue also, we are going to pre-inform you. So on most of the occasions, actually, South Korea coordinated its policy, as you can say, its activities with China, with North Korea. A very interesting point I also discovered that when I was looking at defense white paper of South Korea 2018, wherever they mention about like they wanted to use improve relations with China, rather than improve, they have used actually word restore or recover relationship with China. Because during Lee Park and Park Geun-hye, last 10 years, South Korean president, they came from conservative political parties and they distanced themselves from China. So he was basically emphasizing that, look, I'm going to bring back that old Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun period. So he tried to say that, look, we are going to be much more different than previous governments. So restore and recover, these are the two words. I think, I don't know how many times they use these two words. So I think with China, he has been trying to deal with this manner. With you can say with United States also, how they do actually, in case of dealing with North Korea, we saw that on every occasion, South Korea communicated with the United States. The first presidential envoy, when they visited North Korea, after coming back, immediately they went to United States to report. And overall, I think South Korea was coordinating between America and North Korea negotiation to an extent. That's why actually recently North Korean, they say that don't try to become middleman kind of say. So they have been. South Korea also tried to pacify American problem with revising FTA, as I mentioned earlier. And whenever American policymakers, they come out with this Indo-Pacific strategy, South Korean, they say that, look, okay, they try to avoid this issue, but at the same time, they try to privately convince them that, look, our new Southern policy, actually in case of new Southern policy means basically that South Korea is going to have much more cooperative relationship with ASEAN country as in India. And in that relationship, there are going to be three important goals: peace, prosperity, and people. So we can talk about that, that's required. So South Korea tries to convince United States that, look, your Indo-Pacific policy and our new Southern policy, they are related. So almost in every negotiation, actually, I can give you a few examples that suppose in December 2018, third South Korea American Syrian economic dialogue happened, and in that, when this Indo-Pacific strategy was mentioned, it was mentioned like both the countries, they discussed way to work more closely together in implementing Indo-Pacific strategy and new Southern policy. So I think they tried to say that, look, this our new Southern policy is having, we can say, a smaller, maybe a lighter version of your new, your Indo-Pacific strategy. So they have been trying to pacify America with that. So I will say that, look, in the beginning, South Koreans, they were not having, South Korean government, they were not ready to come out openly and say anything about Indo-Pacific. Actually, in 2018, early, when Moon Jae-in government was asked about this, that what is their opinion, stand on Indo-Pacific, they said, we don't have any stand. But gradually, since lots of pressure from America and others, and lots of happenings, they are much more, you can say. So, but still they have been saying that, look, our Indo-Pacific strategy and our let's say American Indo-Pacific strategy and South Korean new Southern policy, they are connected to each other. And actually they have been doing, like, say, if you look at the new Southern policy, actually he has been very active. President Moon Jae-in, in last, you can say, in very first 2 years of his term, he visited all the 10 ASEAN countries. Last year, he invited all those 10 heads of state from ASEAN countries. He had been quite, you can say, frequent and quite, you can say, careful about India-South Korea relations. So I will say that they say that, look, through this, we are basically going to we are going to compensate even if we are not having, you can say, directly participation in your Indo-Pacific strategy. And I will say that, look, again, I will quote their foreign policy, their MOFA. They issued diplomatic white paper 2018, which was released in January 2019. So diplomatic white paper says, and I'm quoting basically, how they appreciate India. So the diplomatic white paper says, in his keynote speech at Shangri-La Dialogue in June, Modi emphasized the importance of an inclusive Indo-Pacific region. He also pursued balanced diplomacy in the face of rivalry among great powers, holding the US-Japan-India summit as well as the China-India-Russia summit in November and December on the sidelines of the G20 summit. So when they are mentioning this appreciation in their diplomatic white book, I feel that it means that probably they are endorsing, or they are basically seeking to have that kind of approach. Actually, many South Korean scholars, they have been talking that South Korean position is much closer to what ASEAN they had last year in June. ASEAN, they had something called ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific Strategy. So overall, I will say that South Korean foreign policy, they say that, look, there are so many options available, but let's restrict ourselves to two important options. One is basically to our new Southern policy, and second is basically our bilateral alliance with the United States. So we should maintain these two important. In dealing with China, these two important pillars are going to be helpful. At the same time, they don't say that they discard Indo-Pacific strategy. They say that, look, we are not going to be much more overt on Indo-Pacific strategy. We are just going to keep. And South Korean, actually, South Korean scholars, many of them actually I talked to, they say that, look, why you complain about South Korea? In last 2 years, especially from 2018, late 2018, even Japan is not using Indo-Pacific strategy word. Actually, their diplomatic official documents in last few years, like last 1.5 years, they are mentioning Indo-Pacific vision. So the country which was basically probably the most active to articulate Indo-Pacific strategy, now they have reduced this Indo-Pacific strategy to Indo-Pacific vision. So they said, you should not actually complain. So overall, I think that South Koreans, they feel that, look, there is a global contest happening between South Korea and between China and United States, and South Korea needs to be very careful. So what they want, suppose if I have to say three important things they want to have. One is basically that first they want that this contest should not escalate. The second thing they would like that even if it escalates or say not escalate, they should not look to be party this side or that side. Third, they will basically they will seek that even if the contest happen between US and China and that becomes military conflict in case, South Korea should not be the frontline state. When I'm saying frontline state, third point, I would say that, look, go into history of South, say Korea. Two important junctures of regional history, one late 19th century and early 20th century, when lots of upheavals were happening, lots of shifts were happening. China was declining power and Japan was rising power. South Korea made choices, but they were irrelevant. And ultimately, South Korea had to suffer. South Korea got colonized. Another important moment of regional history, Second World War, end of Second World War, when US and USSR Cold War actually was getting birth. At that point of time also, South Korean domestic opinion, they were divided. They had to choose between Soviet Union and United States. They chose different, you can say, options, but ultimately South Korea got divided and still the division is on. So they are saying that this is basically, this could be the US-China contest could be the third big shift in regional politics. And this time they don't want, they are quite confident in a way, quite contrast to previous two occasions, that they are much more economically. So they don't, they know that they are very different. But I think they are saying that, look, we should avoid taking sides. And as I mentioned that, even if, because remember the two occasions which I mentioned, the battleground was Korea and Korea had to suffer. So they are saying that if the contest is unavoidable, at least we are not going to be the battleground. We may support one party or another party, can say, depending on our. So finally, I will conclude by saying few things, can say small things, but I think my understanding that this is, you may perceive this is South Korean foreign policy dilemma, but you can also say that this is basically a choice of South Korea. So alleging South Korea that they are fence sitter, I think it's not appropriate, because think about it. India also for so many years, many ASEAN countries, or say even Korean people, they used to ask that whether India is closer to United States or China. And we used to say that, look, we need to have our autonomous foreign policy. India is a big country. We don't want to follow anybody. We are going to have our own course. We are going to chart out. So if South Korea is seeking similar thing, I think we and one more thing which I would like to, let's say two more important things which I will draw your attention then, Aline. One is basically that, South Korean economy, we don't actually, in India, we are talking about cost of decoupling. Lots of people who are saying that, look, even though we want to distance ourselves from China, we need to have it in a long-term basis so that our economy doesn't suffer, because we are having some dependence, trade dependence on China. Think about South Korea. South Korean external trade is basically almost 85% of its GDP. And out of all external trade, almost 22 to 23%, the number one trading partner, China, basically they share with. And if we imagine that one fine morning, China, like say South Korean will say, so even if South Korea has to think about other options, actually after this third problem, many South Korean companies, they started moving from China to Vietnam and other countries. So they have been doing it, but imagining that a country which is basically export-led growth model, 85% basically dependent on external trade, 22% basically on China, will immediately do something very dramatic. I think it's not very. And the second thing which I will say, actually in previous, let's say 2-3 weeks back, Professor Raja Mohan made a very interesting presentation in this Wednesday seminar. And he said that, look, when somebody asked that what is Quad, what is India, you can say, position, why not more, you can say, concretize Indo-Pacific strategy? He said, look, forget about Quad. Think about bilateral, you can say, good relations. So in this crisis situations, India has been able to pen good proximity with Australia, with United States, and so many other, you can say, these two important countries. So he's saying that, look, bilaterally, we should have much more cooperation because they are going to be much more stable and concrete rather than thinking about this multilateral, which is all right. We may allow them to have it, but I think we need to be. So if we are thinking that, look, bilaterally we can have good relations, security understanding with United States, Australia, intelligence sharing with Australia recently. So why not when we demand that South Korea should have Indo-Pacific strategy, they should come on board much more openly, overtly. Probably we don't realize that they already have security agreement with United States. So in case any emergency happens in this regional politics, anyway, they are going to be part of this because. So I will say that having this bilateral security alliance with United States, that should not be overlooked and basically underrated when we allege South Korea that they are not having. So overall, I will say that I will end by saying that this is interesting time. 3 years back, I think Japan was saying that India is a reluctant partner of Indo-Pacific. Now, I think India could say that Japan is a reluctant partner of, when COVID crisis in Japan, Tokyo Tower was basically lit in support of Wuhan, you can say, corona fighters and all those things. So I'm saying that's a very strange thing. We need to think about our own foreign policy priority, national interest, and accordingly we have to make, you can say, foreign policy judgment. It seems to me that South Korea has been trying to do that. Time will tell us actually that whether their choice is good or bad. But it appears to be a, you can say, acceptable, you can say, position which South Korea has right now. Thank you. Your voice is not. Yes.
Yeah. Thanks, Sandeep. Very insightful. Lots of ideas. Very thought-provoking. And how South Korea will looks at Indo-Pacific with its own core concerns and how it navigates between United States and China. You are given some pointers that how it will like to insulate itself from that rivalry, that competition. In that context, one question which I have, and after that I'll go to chat box, etc. That how does Korea look at this possibility of a multipolar Indo-Pacific, which is you go beyond Quad, and there was earlier 2-3 years back a lot of talk about a coalition of middle powers, etc. Has that idea totally been abandoned, or how does Korea look at itself in the balance of forces in Indo-Pacific region in the coming years?
I think it's very, you can say, sir, difficult, you can say, question. But overall, what I read actually, because whenever I look at South Korean documents, foreign policy, like say, released by Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or say, with their Ministry of National Defense, general statement also, they agree with this multipolar world and multipolar Asia, multipolar East Asia. And somehow there's a kind of complacency on the part of South Korea that, look, if we are we don't need to overtly demand multipolar East Asia or multipolar Asia, because Japan is anyway going to do that. So probably they have deliberately tried to say that, look, we support rule-based order, we support multipolar Asia. That multipolarity must be also open. Actually, in one of the statement, Mujay mentioned that multipolar Asia must be open. In the sense, suppose right now there are 7 powers, 6 powers. If the next comes in terms of comprehensive economic, you can say comprehensive national power, that could also be included. So they say that, look, these things are there. They say that, look, we can avoid our attention to these slightly, and rather than making statement, they believe that if we are able to enhance our economic and military capacity. One thing I will tell you, sir, that in last 2000, like 2017, 18, 19, and even 2020 with what they have proposed, the South Korean defense budget has increased much more than actually previous 5-10 years. So they are building themselves economically, militarily, and they believe that having so much debate and discussion and, I can say, assertion, they don't actually help their case. So probably that would be the, but I'm not basically, I have never followed it actually systematically.
Thank you, Sandeep. The chat box, one question was by Mr. Rohan Chaudhary. I think that you have already answered how ROK looks at Indo-Pacific. Commodore Vasan, would you like to pose a question?
Yes, sir.
Commodore Vasan, please. Please unmute Commodore Vasan. Commodore Watson, go ahead.
I just was waiting to be unmuted. Thank you,
Okay.
Dr. Mishra. There were three questions which I put in the chat box.
Mm.
Essence is that essentially when you talk about the vision, the term that's being used by Japan now, as opposed to strategy, I do not see too much of a difference because vision is more important than a strategy. So unless you have a vision, you will not be able to work on it. So it may be a case of semantics or even drawing out a larger canvas than what was described by strategy. So I would like to have your views on this. The second one was on South Korea's economic investments in India. After all, many of the big houses from South Korea are household names here, and they invested heavily even in Tamil Nadu in terms of their automobile industry and all that. So since we are looking at decoupling from China, what are the other areas that have been identified which will enable both countries to have a separate global supply chain? Because we are determined that we need to move away from China. And therefore, I think Korea, Japan, Vietnam, many others can help in this process. So I am sure the government agencies are looking at this, but specific to South Korea, what other spheres would you look at that would enable us to move away from China and shape a different trajectory in terms of global supply chain? If there is further time, then I will ask the third question. Otherwise, I don't want to buy up the entire time. But two questions for you at this moment. Thank you.
I think, sir, I have a slightly different take on your first question. I personally feel that, look, Indo-Pacific idea and Indo-Pacific concept and Indo-Pacific vision, this was basically articulated by lots of scholars in India, US, Japan, Australia, several other ways. And at popular level also, people, scholars also, they discuss about these things. Progress, in my opinion, means if this idea, strategy, vision becomes a clear-cut strategy, which is in concrete forms. If it's moving from strategy, you can say vision to strategy, I think it's a progress. But if it's moving from strategy to vision, I think it's, in a way, in my opinion, it's dilution. Anyway, we can debate about that, but that's my understanding. So I will say that, because many people, they say that like say last year June, acting defense minister of defense secretary of the United States, he came out with an Indo-Pacific strategy document, 50 pages, 52 pages document. And many people, they criticize the document saying that, look, there's nothing concrete in that. So I will say that there was a search for much more concrete things. I don't know, that is probably missing. If you reduce it to, rather it will go back. I agree with you that vision is more important, but I'm saying that you need that vision to be implemented anyway. So we can discuss about that later on. About India, South Korea, I think, sir, when China, like say, when South Koreans, they want to diversify their economic dependence on China, they look for several other destinations, and India is one of them actually. In 2017-18 also, they had lots of, you can say, exploration about Indian market and Indian conditions, and they did come. Actually, they became they had lots of, you can say, there's a research institute called Korea Institute for International Economic Policy. So a big team came, and actually they were here, and they discussed with how could Korea be part of Skill India, Make in India, all those, you can say, different. So they had a very long, I think 7-day or 3 to 7 days, I'm not able to, but a long, reasonably long period of conversation with our Ministry of Finance. But I think when it comes to realization of that potential, is still very, I think, less than satisfactory. Lots of businesses from China to Vietnam, I think 70 to 80% they got realized. And the businesses which wanted to move from China to India, the realization rate has been much, much lower. So that's a big problem. And I hope that both countries, they should address that.
Sandeep, that is a very complex issue.
Yeah.
And we have many raised hands in the among the participants. I'll start in that order. Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, please. Are you there, Ambassador Bhatia?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair, and Thank you, Sandeep. It's a great pleasure to hear two of the country's best experts on the Korean affairs, an area on which most of us remain generally quite blind because the focus is so much on China, US, ASEAN, and Quad. I want to ask two somewhat interrelated questions. First is about this emergence of what is called Quad Plus. This meeting of Quad, when 3 additional countries were invited to take part, South Korea was one of them. Even though it was projected to be largely COVID-related cooperation, the messaging was clear to Chinese that if it is necessary, America can put enough pressure on Seoul to fall in line and be seen in company of the Quad countries at a very critical time. So does it have some implications in terms of your reading of South Korea? The second question is to take you to the other side of the periphery, and that is Africa. I've been noticing that South Korea has been scoring one success after the other through its diplomacy in Africa. So have you been studying it, and what, according to you, are the main themes and sectors of cooperation in the countries that they are focusing on these days? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I think very important questions. I also, I think Quad Plus, I think as you mentioned, I agree that actually, but as you mentioned yourself, that Quad Plus is essentially till now it's meant for dealing with pandemic plus its economic repercussion. So still it's not going to, so that they have themselves accepted. But as you said that America could show that, look, we can bring in South Korea as and when we want to be part of Quad initiatives. So that's what I emphasize, sir, that anyways, US and South Korea, they are having security alliance. In this regional politics, attack on one country is considered to be attack on another country. So I think China is aware about that. They don't, I don't think they are unaware about the, you can say, provisions of security treaty, mutual defense treaty, which US and South Korea, they have. So I'm saying that if basically South Korea, they are reluctant to have a regional defense mechanism with United States at this point of time. But I think all of us, including South Korea, including Japan, including China, all of us basically, we are aware that if United States, they push South Korea hard, South Korea had no choice but to come in and be part of this thing. Agree with you.
Africa. Sandeep, about Africa, second question.
Yeah, so Africa, sir. Africa, as I mentioned, sir, I feel my reading, I'm not, I haven't gone into details of what activities South Korean companies and South Korean governments are having in African countries. But I will just say one fundamental thing, which is my understanding about South Korean foreign policy, that look, they are much more about serving their economic interests, their trade interests. So I'm not very sure that they are having any strategic and other, you can say, objective in their mind while dealing with countries. That's my general sense, but I'm not aware about details how they have been working on actually in African continent.
Okay, thank you, Sandeep. Ambassador Yogendra Kumar, are you there? Please unmute Ambassador Yogendra Kumar.
Yes. Thank you so much. Very interesting talk. Following up on Ambassador Bhatia's point, like he talked about the Quad Plus, where South Korea has been engaged to a certain extent. My question actually relates to this: that to what extent, I mean, what kind of manifestations of diplomatic posture you find now from South Korea's side, in terms of kind of vision they have about post-COVID vision for the Indo-Pacific, And I'm asking that question in the context of the current disequilibrium, emerging disequilibrium in South China Sea, the technology kind of war with, I mean, different technology worlds, for example, that prospect. And also, to what extent, what is the vision, what they're developing in post-COVID world as to how they can make the Indo-Pacific region a much more stable place, you know, because they have experienced G20 and so on and so forth. So how exactly are they trying to develop that vision? Thank you.
Sandeep, go ahead, please.
I think post-COVID, as I talked earlier also, you know, South Korean objective, foreign policy objective has been not to be part of this contest which is happening between US and China. But as I also mentioned that if the contest becomes very, you can say, intense, South Korea has no choice but to be part of it. And when they will be part of it, actually, as I told you, that they have a bilateral alliance with United States. So that would be the main, you can say, driver to decide about South Korean role and positions. But overall, I think in post-COVID situation, because increasingly it's quite clear that US and China contest is making that neutral space almost impossible. And post-COVID-19, I think it's going to be much more strained. So in that situation, South Korea probably would have to take a call, and they would, I'm quite sure about their call, what should be. I think all of us are actually quite sure about their call. The only thing which basically South Korea would try to avoid, that they should not have economic damage. So whatever be, suppose recently I heard that some important rare earth materials which were basically supplied from China to Japan and to South Korea, which is very important for semiconductor and other things. They are looking for replacement. They are looking for some. So they have like Japan had discovered that some places right now it's technologically not feasible, very costly, but I think they are looking for some other options. So they will minimize their economic damage and then they will go for that. And finally, I will say that they would try, especially South Korea would try not to be the frontline state, I'm saying. They are not going to contest China. They are saying that, look, if US contests China, we may support you, or rather we will support you. Structurally, we are placed, we don't have choice but to support you, but we are not going to be the main contestant of China.
Thank you, Sandeep. Ambassador Saurabh Kumar, please. Are you there, Saurabh?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair, for very good remarks, overview. And thank you, Speaker, very good remarks, elaborated. I had the question about
come a little closer, a little louder, please.
Understanding of the South Korean view on the nuclear issue. There are so many contingencies possible in this region. So in some eventuality, if Japan were to go nuclear, we leave aside the question about the eventualities, because that's very speculative and different. But let's say, against that contingency, it is a possibility. What could South Korean thinking be, and on the strategic level, keeping in mind that I don't know if you will agree, they think, but there has to be eventual unification. He cannot hold on. You see, the North Koreans, sooner or later, this is the tide of the time. So that nuclear capability will fall in their hands eventually. So depending on their thinking, they may give it up, they may think, but I don't mean it, I just want an idea of thinking. But before that, may I please ask you from your remarks, you mentioned 85% of Korean GDP is foreign trade. I presume it would be through the seas. Most of it through by sea lanes. So then how come such aloofness to the Indo-Pacific idea or whatever vision strategy? They are not a neutral or unconcerned party. It's a vital interest, and agreed, they need the caution everybody likes. So it's axiomatic that they should want to stay aloof from any conflict or not want the conflict to hot up and so on. But realities are realities. The whole thing is based on the importance of the sea lanes, of the waters, against potential aggressiveness by China, which it is showing. So they are not really an unaffected party. So they may not want to come out, but we are not talking of the official position. That's caution is understandable there. What about literature, the academic community thinking on those points? Similar from on that point of view, also, what is their thinking on India's approach or reservations on the RCEP? Would you be able to say something? Thank you.
ASEAN.
Go ahead, Sandeep.
I think so first question about nuclear issue. I think there had been a very long, you can say, debate in South Korean domestic politics. And at any point of time, if you have survey in South Korea, 50 to 70% people, they feel that we can have our own nuclear weapons. So these are basically, but I think Americans, they are quite clear that they are not actually, there are biannual some agreement between US and South Korea that what will happen to spent fuel rod, because 40% of South Korean energy needs are basically they are fulfilled by nuclear energy. So they have nuclear reactors. They are supplier of Saudi Arabia. I think 5-10 years back they had 20 billion some contract. India also, they were looking for some kind of say building nuclear reactors in India. So they do have nuclear technology, but they are not allowed to process their nuclear fuel rods. Actually, the position of the nuclear fuel rods are basically with Americans. So these are some restrictions there, but I think at popular level, lots of Koreans, they do think about nuclear option, especially when they have some kind of disjunction with Americans in their foreign policy making. 1970s, actually, Park Chung, he did a report that he tried to have some kind of say 2009-10 against South Korea. There were leakage that some South Korean scientists, government said that look, privately they have been doing it. And the most recently, I would say, especially in missile technology, I would say, right now, till now, South Korea doesn't make any missile more than 800 kilometer you can say, range. But I heard that few weeks back, defense minister of South Korea, he mentioned that probably they are having some understanding with Americans, and they may have some longer. They are going to send their own satellite to lower orbits, maybe some. So they have been basically looking at, and especially in the era of, you can say, Donald Trump, when Trump is basically delegating security responsibility to allies. I think South Korea may have to think, maybe Americans would not have that. It's a very complicated issue. This much I can say it now. About your next question is very interesting, that if 84%, say 82%, like say 80 to 85, actually at one point in time it was more than 90%. 4 years back, actually it was more than 90%. But I think a huge part of external trade dependence of South Korea, but maritime. But I'm saying that the first number one trading partner with whom they are having, that is basically China. So China, even if they take maritime routes, basically maritime route is basically goes to between, say, US, say China and South Korea, that East China Sea. So I think but I do agree with your point. Largely, the sea routes are important for South Korea, and that's why I think if you look at South Korean debate and discussion, what they are saying that look, new Southern policy, they say, because Americans also they complain that new Southern policy, you are emphasizing people, you are emphasizing prosperity, and you are working for both of them, but you are emphasizing on peace. Peace basically stability means security issues, means like navigation issue and all those sea routes are not working, not actually coming out on those issues much more openly and much more actively. So when they, like the people who criticize South Korean policy, new Southern policy, that it's not Indo-Pacific, they say that your peace part in new Southern policy is quite weak and you need to reconsider it. So I agree that I think they need to can say recalibrate it actually reform, let's say rethink about it.
Thanks, Sandeep. Vice Admiral Muralidharan, please.
Thank you, Chair.
RCEP, sorry, RCEP, please. Thank you.
RCEP, they are part of RCEP, sir.
I was referring to their view on India's reservations about RCEP.
I think I haven't actually come across any specific statement about India's not joining RCEP, and South Korea is what I think they have, like some basic you can say opinion, like it's a good thing, like all of us should come, but not specific that India did something good or bad. That kind of statement I haven't come across any.
Please go ahead, Vice Admiral Muralidharan.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Dr. Sandeep, not directly to Indo-Pacific, but from what you mentioned about North Korea being a big priority of theirs in the foreign policy, and is there a likelihood that we are likely to see, or is there even a thinking on their part for a unification of Koreas like we saw in Germany after a very, very long gap of many years? Thank you.
I think when South Korean, they make their policy vis-a-vis North Korea, there are two important goals which are basically quite talked about. One is basically unification, another is good relations. It's very interesting that progressive politicians in South Korea, they talk about good relations. They don't talk about reunification. But the conservative and hawkish political parties and leaders, they talk about reunification and less about good relations with North Korea. So basically, South Korea, there is an understanding that unification is important. It may happen, it should happen. Even though younger generation, they are having some reservation because they feel that if reunification happens, there could be some disadvantages to them. Because right now, suppose if they have $33,000 per capita income, a poor part of North is basically integrated, so it's going to go down. So they feel that it's not, but overall, there's a policy level, there's a consensus that look, unification must happen. But there are two approaches. One is that look, make good relations with North Korea, stay there for say good relations with say 1 or 2 decades, and ultimately unification will happen because South and North Korea, they are having same language, same culture, same history, same ethnic stock. I think there's no reason apart from ideology and apart from this political accident which happened in 1945. I think there's no reason why this Korea should be divided. So it may happen, but gradually good relations to unification, and people who want to annoy North Korea, they talk reunification first, and they don't talk about good relations with North Korea. So it's a very interesting debate vis-a-vis unification and good relations with North Korea in South Korean politics.
Thank you.
Thanks. Ambassador Suresh Goyal, please. Suresh, are you there?
Thank you, Skan. Thank you, Sandeep. Great presentation. In fact, I must say that on the same day to have your presentation and the article by Suzanne in the morning seems to devote the day to ROK. So today is the ROK flag day in that sense. Sandeep, one question really. I seem to sense from your presentation that the South Korean security narrative is really hinged on security alliance with the USA. All right. At the same time, they have also now seen that what they wanted to keep the trade track separate from the security track is not possible after what happened in the case of deployment of THAAD missiles, and China put all kinds of pressure on them not to do so, and they realized that they cannot put them in the separate compartments anymore. Now, my question is, when it comes to crunch, and I think it will call in for a bit of your academic assessment and a strategic assessment, when it comes to the crunch, in the case of the US-China conflict in the Indo-Pacific, when ROK may have to actually weigh the advantage of being in the alliance or being or safeguarding their own trade interests? Which way would their own interests weigh? And mind you, because no alliances are ever permanent, they can always be reviewed. So I'm asking for your assessment in this particular case on the basis of your knowledge. Thank you.
I think my basic assessment is that, as I mentioned in my presentation also, that South Korea would try to avoid as much as possible to take sides because of structural reasons we discussed. Now, but as you mentioned that in case there's a crunch situation, in crunch situation, I have no doubt that ultimately South Korea will be with United States. Why I say that? Because if I look at South Korean defense preparedness, if I look at their missile systems, if I look at their air force, if I look at their navy, and it's so much integrated with United States that like right now, South Korea is one of the 10 big defense power in the world. They spend almost 42 billion US dollar a year on defense. So it's a huge, you can say military. But if they don't get replenishment, kind of support from United States, if they distance themselves from United States, that being one of the 10th will actually be having no meaning. So I don't see any, I have no doubt that ultimately in a crunch situation, finally they will come along with the United States. But I think that to the possible they can avoid, they would like to avoid.
Thank John. Would you like to pose your question briefly? Last question. John, are you there?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, good afternoon, and thank you, Dr. Sandeep, for having a very good presentation. Well, it's something that has already been talked about. Because I mean, as you said, the US-Korea alliance is the bedrock of Korea's security posture. But it seems to me that there is a diverging perception between United States and ROK with respect to the scope of the alliance. The Koreans wants to limit the scope of the alliance to Korean Peninsula, particularly focusing on North Korean issues, while the Americans try to look at it in a more global and in the regional context. So this is perhaps one of it's a debate that coming up in the Korean discourse on Indo-Pacific, because I mean, while they are worried about, while they have this concern about, I mean, America commitment and also, well, this entanglement and, I mean, America ignoring Korea, but they are also concerned about getting entangled in the American regional adventurism. So given this diverging perception, how do you see this is going forward in terms of, and while looking at it in the broader Korean discourses of Indo-Pacific, how do you see this? Thank you.
Please answer, Sandeep, and conclude.
Yeah, I think my reading is that, look, actually, I think a week back or 10 days back, there was a seminar organized by KNDU, Korea National Defense University, in which actually Defense Minister of South Korea also participated. In his remark, actually, he mentioned that, look, when I say, like, when people talk about divergence between US and South Korean priorities, and you can say they need to realize that this is divergence, or rather some differences between friends. So the overall friendship, that framework must be always kept in mind. We do have some, we may have some, you can say, priorities differences, but overall we are friends and our differences are part of that. So I will say that South Korea and US, they do have some divergence, but that divergence is basically inside that thing. And both of them, they know, and that's why for so many years they have been negotiating special measures agreement and all those things, because both of them, they know that for each other they are very important. So they try to have more space, more, you can say, as per their wishes, but ultimately they accept this framework. That's my sense. And I think it's basically differences of friends rather than basically and contest, you can say, a rival. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandeep. And I think we now come to the end of the session. Thanks all the participants. It has been fascinating. There is all the relationships are in state of flux. The entire Asia Pacific region from Asia Pacific, it has become Indo-Pacific. Everything is in a flux, and we have to watch very carefully how the relationships are changing, evolving, and how they can be in our own national interest. And all of us know where our main problem lies, main challenge lies. So thank you very much. Thanks for your participation, and enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you.